Hello viewers and cherished aficionado of the YouTube channel of the journal Raison Ardente. I am Gabriel Kofi Akpa of the Society of Jesus and a graduate student at the Faculty of Philosophy of the Loyola University of Congo. I am extremely privileged to welcome you all to the interview session of the ongoing intensive course in Philosophy of Language and Mind, here taking place in the Faculty of Philosophy of the Loyola University of Congo and that of Catholic University of Congo. Before we zoom into the section, I'll plead your indulgence to introduce to you our panelist for today, who is in the person of Professor Christian Kanzian of the University of Innsbruck, a professor of metaphysics, analytic philosophy, and history of philosophy. Prof, you're welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be your interview partner today.
Thank you. Your initial comments.
I'm very grateful that I may be here, of course, giving the course, having lively discussion in classroom, and of course also that you considered me as a part of your project here on your YouTube channel.
Okay. So, Prof, thank you very much, Prof, for zooming into the section. So, without the slightest doubt, the problem of language has become the subject of thought of several thinkers in the philosophical discipline, so that it was at the heart of the fundamental turning point for the protagonists of the Vienna cycle. Prof, faced with this fact, what really is language, and how can we understand it as an object of philosophical reflection?
What really is language? As I think, language is at first human behavior, characteristically human behavior. And how can we understand it as an object of philosophical reflection? In philosophy of language, we reflect on different levels and from different perspectives. Taking account that speaking, that language use is always combining signs in a logically utmost transparent way, we do synthetics. If we stress the aspect of what we are doing with words, of use, we do pragmatics. And if we raise the question for the meaning of linguistic expression and for the truth conditions, we are in the field of semantics.
Thank you, Prof. Prof, now while focusing on the philosophy of language, what difference do you make between the philosophy of language and the philosophy of mind? And what are the principal terms of philosophy of language, and how are they related?
The object of philosophy of mind is mind. It is the affective, the cognitive, the spiritual capacity of human beings. The object of philosophy of language, actually, is the linguistic expression of mental, cognitive expressions. What are the principal terms? Of course, that depends on the perspective from which we are doing philosophy of language. Generally seen, the principal terms of our best friend, Gottlob Frege.
Okay.
Meaning, sense, reference can also be regarded as principal terms of philosophy of language in general, as I think.
Okay, yes, you've just mentioned Frege. I would like to say that several actors have clearly distinguished themselves in relation to the question of language, in relation to philosophy, and among them is, as you say, our friend Frege, Wittgenstein, Austin. I would like to know from you, what is the contribution that each of these actors made? And in other words, what is the difference in analysis between the conception of these actors?
Let me start with Ludwig Wittgenstein. I think the most important contribution of him to philosophy of language is the focusing on what we can call the therapeutical aspect. Avoid misunderstanding. John Longshore Austin, pointed out that misunderstanding in our linguistic behavior may occur on 3 different levels. On the level of locution, of the content of what we are saying, on the level of illocution and misunderstanding what we do actually when we use words, and also on the level of paralocution. That means under the aspect that we also intend to produce some effects with what we are doing. The main contribution of Gilbert Ryle is, in the context of philosophy of language and philosophy of mind, that some problems, at first the mind-body problem, the famous mind-body problem in the tradition of Descartes, rests on a wrong understanding of mental terms. If you avoid this wrong understanding, the problem is perhaps not solved, but it disappears. Frege, best friend, most important contribution I see in his anti-psychologism. Meaning is something objective. It's not only a subjective association.
Yes, as you said, remaining on Frege, more specifically, why is it that in his search of an ideal and exact language, Frege started with what? Mathematics in order to understand language. What will you say?
I think the easiest way of answering the question is from his biography. He's a mathematician. He comes from chemistry to mathematics, and from mathematics to the attempt to find the logical basis or fundament of mathematical language. So, of course, he comes from mathematics. But this is also a systematic reason. I think that Frege wants to teach us or to help us seeing that an analysis of mathematical language can also let us understand the fundamental logical structure of our language use in general.
Okay. Yes, I would say with regard to the various theories that have come up in language, some opposing each other, do you think that we can still rely on philosophy of language to clarify philosophical discourse? Or in other words, how relevant is philosophy of language in our society today?
These are 2 very important questions. The first, of course, I think so. It is quite usual or quite normal that in philosophical disciplines we find a variant, sometimes opposing theories. In philosophy of mind, of course, also in metaphysics, in ontology, and also in philosophy of religion. That has to do with the fact that philosophers do their job from different perspectives, of course also by sticking to different axioms or presuppositions. Of course also there are different methods. I think in philosophy there is as much plurality as in normal common day life. The second question is the question for the relevance of philosophy, at first philosophy of language for society. I think the main task of philosophy of language, and also of all philosophers of language we have in our seminar, is to improve mutual understanding of people and to avoid misunderstanding. Since I'm sure that so many problems, that so many conflicts in society are caused by misunderstanding, I think that philosophy of language is very relevant under this aspect.
Thank you, Prof. Just to wrap up, considering not only the elimination of metaphysics with contribution of Carnap, but also the negation of ethical statements by Wittgenstein and John Austin, can one deny the thesis according to which the philosophy of language, instead of solving the problems of language, has created other problems? Is it philosophically possible to justify the non-existence of ethical facts, given the abundant literature on the issue?
This is a critical question, of course, but I think you are correct. This is true what you are saying. I think the attitude of the early Carnap, of Wittgenstein, also as Austrian trial towards ethics, aesthetics, also metaphysics can be called into question, of course, and also be criticized. Sometimes they also have corrected it in the course of the philosophical work. See, for instance, Carnap in his critique of metaphysics is really less radical in his earlier major writings than the very beginning. But you are absolutely true. So this is a stance we can also criticize, but benevolently interpreted, all these authors want to make us aware that also in these disciplines, also in ethics, in metaphysics, we should avoid what they call pseudo-problems, ambiguities. When we try to make clear seriously the proper use of specific terms and the real meaning of the term we use. To make it short, let's make clear and transparent our terminology before we investigate in our topics. And that also may be a support of doing ethics, also metaphysics in really a good sense.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think this has been a wonderful section, and myself, I have learned a lot. And from the classes, I think one statement that I think will always remain with me is what Wittgenstein said, that whereas one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. In other words, whatever will have to be said clearly. I think our session has demonstrated this. You have spoken clearly, and that you ought not to keep quiet. And I thank you very much. Maybe for our viewers, I would like to find out from you your impression about the section so far, the course that we are doing so far, the participation at the faculty level and all that. Maybe our viewers are interested in knowing your views.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can only repeat what I've said at the very beginning. I'm very, very grateful that I have the opportunity to work together with you and learn a lot of things by myself. Thanks to your very good question and also the discussions we have in our classroom. So my impression can be expressed by a large amount of gratitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, viewers, for following this section on our YouTube channel, the journal Raison Ardente. I thank you all, and I will leave you with this, that whereas one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Thank you very much.